Yeah, it's difficult being tall for you short people. Hi, everybody. Jimmy, alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober. And, man. I want to thank Vince and Debbie for the invitation and the committee for all the hard work you're doing. We run something like this in New Jersey, so I know that there's a lot of hard work that goes behind the scenes. So if everything looks easy, it's only because of that hard work. So thank the committee one more time. And I'm trying to get my timer going, or I'll be here for 3 hours. Okay. And so it's always customary where I come from to let you know that I have a home group. It's called the Design for Living Group on the Jersey Shore. I have a sponsor by the name of Bob B. from St. Paul, Minnesota. I sponsor a lot of men, but most importantly, I've been sober since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was on March 28th, 1987. Which, if you do the math, I'll help you guys out. That's 9 more days than Harold. And so 39 years today of... Kind of blows my mind. Just one word for Roger. You know, Roger's the taper here, and I just want to put a plug in for Roger because of all the hard work he does and put sound in this room and the nice pictures of our pioneers. And you know, Roger doesn't come here on his own dime. Well, he does come here on his own dime. So it's really important that we support our tapers, because running a conference myself, I know that if I didn't have a guy like him come or any other taper, you know, I would have to depend upon hotel AV. And if anyone's ever dealt with that, that's a nightmare, and it's a lot of money, and it would really raise the cost of a lot of registrations for these events that we're trying to help people with. So, you know, we want to help him out. So thank you for all the work that you do, Roger. So last night, or yesterday, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I think it was late afternoon, I walked into a bar, and at that point, I've been living on the streets for close to 18, 19 months, homeless, in northern New Jersey, lower Manhattan, jumping the turnstile, doing that aimless walk that we talk about, you know, traumatizing, dehumanizing. I don't even have enough adjectives to tell you how lonely and hungry and cold and all that stuff, you know. And I'm walking the streets, and I walk in this bar, and I see an old guy that I know from my old neighborhood, and he says, "Hey, Jimmy, they're hiring guys like you in Newark Airport." Finally, being seen for my potential. And I never flew an airplane before, but I'll try, because what do I have to lose at this point? And so there used to be an airline in New Jersey. I don't even know if it made it to New York. We probably didn't have enough gas, but it was called People's Express. I don't know if any of you guys remember that. It was $69 from Newark to Fort Lauderdale. I mean, it was the greatest flight in the world. And they would hire guys like us. And the job was to take the luggage that was over there and hopefully get it on the plane over there. You know, I always like to segue here and say, if you flew through the airport or Newark in the 80s and you're still waiting for your luggage, I'll make amends after this talk. But the truth of the matter is, you know, they would hire guys like us, and that next day, today, around 10 o'clock in that morning, me and 2 guys borrowed a car. The cops like to say we robbed the car, but the window was open and the keys were in it. But we robbed the car and we went out to Newark Airport. All 3 of us are now sober over 38 years. All 3 of us made amends to that guy that we stole the car off. And we walk into this, well, it's an airport. It's huge. People all over the place. And they're doing a little bit of an interview process. And the first question the guy asked me was something like, "Can you lift a suitcase?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're hired." I mean, and I can't even tell you really what went on that day. I was so shot out and I was just a mess. And I remember he asked me to go sit outside, and I came outside like my wife Mary Beth is sitting here, and I couldn't tell you how I felt in that moment at the age of 29 years old, sitting in a chair in the middle of Newark Airport. It wasn't until I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and opened that blue book. And on page 8, Bill tells his first step experience, which I think he puts words to all our first step experience. When he says, "No words could tell the loneliness and despair, the feeling of bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I've met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol's my master." At the age of 29 years old, homeless, in the middle of Newark Airport, sitting in a metal chair. For the first time in my life, I think drinking's a problem. Now, a blind man can see that, but aren't we the last? When all of a sudden, a complete stranger sat next to me. And after a couple of minutes, the stranger looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you?" Now, people weren't asking me how my 401k was doing or that new car I just bought. "What's wrong with you, dude?" And I split my life story up on a gentleman, complete stranger in the middle of Newark Airport. And after a couple of minutes, this man looked at me and said, "I have the answer for you." And I said, "What's that?" And he pulled out a piece of paper and he wrote down a street. And he goes, "You know where this street is?" I said, "That's my old neighborhood." And then he asked me a very important question. He says, "Is it possible for you not to take a drink the rest of this day?" And I was honest with him. I said, "It's like 10 o'clock in the morning. I want to drink right now." He said, "Try not to drink and be in front of that address at 7 o'clock. I showed Roger where that piece of cement was, where I stood at 7 o'clock that night with my knees knocking, my stomach churning, my mind going a million miles an hour. I was so delusional. Was I even in Newark Airport? I mean, what would I be doing in Newark? I was what we used to call in the old AA world, there was a word called mocus. I was mocus. Now, I don't know what that word means, but it's like a perfect description for a guy like me. And I'm standing there at 7 o'clock that night, tonight, 39 years ago. When all of a sudden, in 1979, Chevy Impala pulled up. Stranger was driving the car, and he had a bunch of other strangers in the car. And they rolled down that window, and they said the most spiritual thing you'll ever hear in Alcoholics Anonymous: "Get in the car." And they brought me to my first meeting tonight, 39 years ago. And here I am. It's a miracle. And that's what we've been hearing all weekend, miracles. So, that sets the table for letting you know that I'm 39 years sober and I had no more character defects. Don said I could finally talk about this stuff in the past tense. I used to be like this. I used to be like that. But what a lie that would be. I had a sponsor years ago. Billy knew him. This guy by the name of RDB. He died with 58 years of sobriety. And he used to say this all the time. He goes, your character defects are never taken away, but they're minimized to a place of what Nancy said is awareness. Being able to see this stuff before you act out on this stuff. And that took me a while. It still takes me a while to do that, right? So Mary Beth, Harold, when I listen to their stories, I think, these are the steps of revelation. What we find out about ourselves in that third step. Our troubles are our making. Selfishness, self-centeredness. Harold went into, getting down to the common manifestations of living a life on self-will. The anger, the resentments, the fear, all that stuff. The harms we've caused. And then we come out of that fifth step, and I really believe we come to the step of trying. The step of trying, right? Trying to stop doing the things that I do that are objectionable and start doing the things that I think are not objectionable, right? And where did I hear that? Well, I like this little reading that Bill writes in the 12 and 12. I'm doing this for my buddy Matthew right there. But in the 12 and 12, I just like how Bill opens this up on step 6. He says, this is the step that separates the men from the boys, the women from the girls. So declares a well-loved clergyman who happens to be one of AA's greatest friends. He goes on to explain that any person capable of enough willingness and honesty to try repeatedly step 6 on all his faults without any reservations whatever has indeed come a long way spiritually, and therefore entitled to be called a man who's sincerely trying to grow in the image and likeness of his Creator. So I'd like to start off with a consideration that was given many years ago. Now, a consideration is not a question, really. It's just something to ponder, something to think about, something to meditate on, something to reflect on, contemplate on, whatever language you want to use. But this is what a man said to me one time after coming out of 6 and 7. He said to me, "Jimmy, do you look at the people in your life, the situations of your life, and the circumstances of your life through the lens of a character defect or through the eyes of God?" And it stopped me in my tracks. Because if you're anything like me, I've been looking at everything, every person in my life with resentment and anger and fear and jealousy and selfishness and whatever that character defect is. I look at all the situations in my life and I'm always blaming people and I'm always yelling at people and I'm always angry at people and I have a lot of shame and I have a lot of guilt and I have a lot of remorse and I got all these things going on, but I don't think it because my character defects are my tools for life. And I don't know how to deal with anything in my life without my character defects. It's just like alcohol. But then you remove alcohol, I still got all these character defects. So what do I do from here? Right? So what happened? How did the change occur? Or has the change occurred? You know, I'd like to tell you about the most important question that was ever asked. You ever think about that? What was the most important question that anyone has ever asked you? Right? Now, looking at this audience, I know we get a lot of these kind of questions like, Harold, what's wrong with you? Or Tommy, what happened? Right? Well, Vince, you didn't do that again, did you? And when I was confronted with those kind of questions, of course I would lie, right? To protect myself, right? But on this particular day, I was asked a question that, he painted me in the corner, this gentleman. That I had no choice but to answer it with the truth. You see, I was asked to speak on the second step at a meeting one day. Now, I was the type of guy that I didn't need to do the steps, but I'll speak on the steps. That's the kind of guy I was, and, I'll tell some jokes. I read the 12 and 12, And so I was asked to speak on the second step. I have no relationship with God, I'm telling these jokes. I'm reading the 12 and 12. I'm doing all this. At the end of the meeting, everyone comes up, shakes my hand. I'm lying, I'm shaking your hand, and all of a sudden a guy walks up to me. I'm 6'4". He was 6'4". He didn't put his hand out to me. He looked at me, eyeball to eyeball and said, "You're screwed." A little bit saltier language. And I wanted to start a fist fight in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because you see, I haven't changed one bit. I don't know how to face resistance with no resistance. I don't know how to face confrontation without violence. But again, God does for me what I could never do for myself. I stepped back and I looked this guy in the eyes. I said, "You're right. I need help." And that next afternoon, in a railroad room apartment. You know what a railroad room apartment is? Those are those old apartments they built after World War I around the New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut area. They look like train cars, right? And your whole family lived there. They came from Europe. Your grandparents, your uncles, your aunts, your cousins, everything. And I'm in this apartment with this guy, and there's a lot of activity going on. And he has a Jack Russell. You know what a Jack Russell is? That's like a newcomer on 40 cups of coffee. That dog is running the walls. And this guy's peppering me with a few questions, a spiritual test, if you may. And the first question he asked me is, how long can you hold your breath? Jimmy, how long can you hold your breath? How long can you be in a 12-step program and not work the 12 steps? He had me. I can't. He went on with a couple of other questions, like what's your relationship with God look like? And again, what does God have to do with any of this? I believe in God. What makes you alcoholic? And the best I could stammer out of my mouth was, I drink too much. I had no idea what Mary Beth talked about, the physical allergy, the mental obsession. Then he asked me a question that many might not believe, but this is just the way it was in my neighborhood back then. He looked at me and said, "Where's your big book?" And I looked at him and I said, "What's a big book?" We weren't encouraged to read the book in my neighborhood back then. Meetings in my neighborhood in the city were speaker meetings, discussion meetings, maybe a 12 and 12 here and there. We didn't really read the book. And then he asked me a question or another consideration. If AA works, why do you have so many problems? Now, I'm not embarrassed by my answers. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I was 5 years sober when that man asked me those questions. An active member of a group, doing all the things that we do in a group, making coffee, setting up chairs, blah, 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 all that stuff. We see I'm dying from a delusion, and we say this all the time, but alcoholism doesn't come in a bottle, it comes in my mind, and my mind's filled with a lot of delusions, a lot of distortions about a lot of things. And one of the biggest delusions I was walking around with in AA with 5 years of not drinking was this, that I think abstinence is a solution to a spiritual malady. I think just not drinking and going to meetings will change me. And yeah, that's really important to not drink and go to meetings, obviously. But I'm the same guy that I was when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous 39 years ago today. I'm a guy that's filled with fear. I'm a guy that's filled with insecurities and inadequacies. And most important, I'm a guy that's walking around in AA with a lot of secrets. You see, if you grow up like I grew up and you grow up in a family like I grew up, you don't talk about what goes on inside. So you learn from an early age to push these emotions down, push this stuff down until it explodes. So I didn't know any of that stuff until I got here, and that's what really just set the table on me. But I sat with this guy, Bill Grace, and he started to paint a picture of what this really looks like. In his opinion, AA has two goals. This is just his opinion, kind of my opinion today. The two goals of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first one, obvious one. Don't pick up the first drink. What's the second goal that we all want to attain? And I think that's to step into the sunlight of the Spirit. To have what we're trying to do, talk about this weekend, a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening, a personality change, psychic change, whatever language you want to do, a transformation. A transformation of the inside so I can go out. Right? And as I sat with this guy over a 3-hour period, he really started to paint me into the corner. He started to paint me into the corner not only in the progression of my alcoholism, but the progression of my behaviors and my character defects. I came to you very angry. I came to you filled with rage. I came to you with so much stuff that I didn't even know how to get rid of. But you see, I'm a tough guy from the streets, and real men don't talk about their feelings. Real men don't cry. Real men, I got all that John Wayneism stuff going on in my life. We don't talk about that stuff. I'm a direct descendant of my old man, the guy I hated. But here I am with this guy, Bill Grace, and he's telling me about his alcoholism, and he's sharing his story about how he was stuck. And then we started to talk about Jimmy's alcoholism. I've been trying to fix, manage, and control my life from that big. And here I am trying to do the same thing, 5 years separated from my last drink in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the biggest delusions we have is that we think life is controllable. And I use my character defects to try to control life. And I use my character defects to try to intimidate you. And I use my character defects to make you feel sorry for me. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I use my character defects. But here I am sitting with this guy, Bill, and, he talked about, in order to get free, I got to walk into the darkness of my life. I got to walk into the darkness of my life. That I'll never become free unless I do walk into the darkness and uncover, discover, and discard the things that are blocking me from God and blocking me from you. So here I sat in that apartment. One of the greatest readings we have, I read this all the time because I just think it's so powerful for me. It comes out of a book called Daily Reflections, what many of you might be familiar with. And it says on May 1st, if you turn to May 1st and you go to the second paragraph on that page, it says, it's the side of myself that I refuse to look at that rules me. I must be willing to look at the dark side in order to heal my heart and my mind, because that's the road to freedom. I must walk into darkness to find the light, and walk into fear to find peace. And the way the old timers would say that is, AA is like a big bonfire. A lot of us are walking around that fire, but eventually that fire is going to go out. If you really want to change, if you really want to grow, you have to walk through that fire and get your ass burnt and feel the uncomfortability of change. But there's one thing I can't do for you, and none of you could do for me, and none of you could probably do for each other. And that's put willingness in your heart. So what makes you willing? Circumstances, being sick and tired of being sick and tired, or as our good friend Ralph likes to say, a good whooped ass. And here I am, I'm whooped, I'm tired, and I'm afraid, because I don't know what change looks like, right? I'm the type of guy that wants to, if I really let go and let God, right? Because that was the standard answer when you went to your sponsor with a problem. What do? Let go, let God. Oh, how do you do that? Well, you match calamity with serenity. Well, how do you do that? They always had the one-liners right back at you. And I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. But in order to get free, I had to start putting these steps in my life, and I had to start, getting into the darkness of my life and bringing those walls down. Anyone else in here with walls? I got walls of alibis. I got walls of excuses. I got walls of blame, rationalization, justification, or as Harold said earlier on, the biggest one, I got the walls of victimization. Nothing's my fault, and it's all your fault. I can't put that spiritual mirror up to myself and look at myself because I'm too afraid. And to walk through fear is difficult for a guy like me. So I make this decision to walk into the darkness, right? And what he always used to talk about is we have to create this space. The space between us, me and God, right? There's too much of Jimmy on Jimmy. I got to create this space to allow God to work in my life. And it's probably one of the hardest things any of us have to do when you're as selfish and self-centered as we are. because I make everything about me, right? But in order to get free, I got to create that space. And the process that we do is what we're talking about today, going through these steps, right? And how it works, it says, what does it say? There are those too who have grave emotional mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. I love that little line, the capacity to be honest. I remember sitting with this guy, Bill. He goes, do you have the capacity to be honest? Because really, that's the golden rule of recovery, rigorous honesty, right? Do I have the capacity to be honest? And before he even let me answer that question, he goes, you know what capacity means? And I'm a smart guy, right? So I've filled up. I don't know. The power to do. Do I have the power to be honest? I might be able to pull it off once in a while. Do I have the power to be unselfish? Do I have the power to be a man with courage? Do I have the power, right? So the capacity, do I have the capacity to be honest? And I love the story of what we used to talk about. I used to hear this story all the time, you know. If this was a coffee cup and I put it here, right? And I said, okay, nobody drink the coffee. We're going to come back next year. Coffee's going to be right here, right? What do you think that coffee's going to look like in that cup in a year? Moldy, dirty, stinky, you know, kind of a lot like our insides, right? But I could take this coffee cup, I can go into the kitchen, go into the bathroom, I could dump it out, I could wash it out, and the cup has the capacity to be filled again with coffee. Well, guess what? It's the same thing as our lives. We all come here broken. We're all broken. And until I start accepting my brokenness, I can't live this spiritual way of living. And all I need to do is empty out. And if I am able to empty out all this stuff, I have the capacity, just like anyone in this room, I have the capacity to be filled with God's love, God's presence, right? But there's a price to be paid, and it's the destruction of self-centeredness. And I got to get down to causes and conditions of these character defects that are blocking me from God. And again, you know, this wasn't my design for living growing up. This is not the way I was raised. This is a foreign thing we're talking about here to me. You know, I always like to say that I was born perfect and I was quickly handed over to these two character defects called mom and dad. And, you know, I make a joke out of that, but the truth of the matter is it's really their fault. Right? And if you're anything like me, it's always someone else's fault. And see, all my parents ever tried to do for me was give me education, morals, values. You know, they tried to give me the best of the world, really. And all I ever did for my parents was take all that goodness, rolled it into a ball, and stuffed it down their throat, and introduced my parents to a way of life that they never even knew existed. You know, and I grew up in a big family. I grew up in a big neighborhood. I'm 68 years old. I grew up at a time when, you know, all the dads worked, all the moms stayed home. The only requirement for membership was 5 or more kids in the neighborhood. I mean, it was a good time. It was the early 60s, you know, and it just seemed like, you know, everything was simple. I don't know why. It just seemed that way, right? And with so many kids and so many big families, there was always an event going on. There was always a party. There was always a christening or graduation. And at every event was King Alcohol. And what I would witness, right? We say this statement all the time, but alcoholism is, you know, is the disease of perception, the way I would look at drinking. I equate drinking to fun. I equate drinking to freedom. I equate to drinking to problem solved. It looked like there was something that went on, and ease and comfort went on when my old man and his friends and my mom and her friends and my cousins and neighbors would drink. Like a lot of us know that. But then there were those days in my house. I got this guy called Dad. He's cunning, he's baffling, he's powerful. My old man's a tough guy. My old man is he was at World War II, don't share nothing about anything in your life, emotionally shut down, great provider, put 5 of us through major universities, but my old man was a tough guy. And he was a tough guy to deal with, you know. And every night at my house, my dad would walk in, my mom would make these 2 pictures, one called martinis, the other one called Manhattans. And again, what I will witness, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, is the ease and comfort that comes at once by taking that drink. And my old man would take that drink and he became a different person. He became a dad that wanted to have a catch in the backyard. He became a guy that, you know, maybe talked about his day or shared an emotion, right? But don't let me fool you, there were those days. Those days look like this in my house. My old man would take that drink and all of a sudden kitchen plates would be flying across the kitchen. Kitchen chairs would be flying across the kitchen. If you grabbed one of us young kids, we'd be flying across the kitchen. So a lot of nights at 5:02 in my house, me, my two brothers, my two sisters, we'd be under that bed or under those sheets waiting for the tornado to stop roaring through the house. And then when we walk out, hey Mom, ain't it grand? The wind stopped blowing. And we would never discuss what just went on in my home. And does that make me alcoholic? I'm not sure. But I'm a kid that grows up with a lot of fear. Fear of violence, fear of big men, fear of authority, fear, the evil and corroding thread. I'm a kid that grows up with a lot of insecurities, a lot of inadequacies. I think I have a learning disability. I don't know that until I'm well into double-digit sobriety, looking back. I can't read a paragraph once and understand it. I got to read it 1,000,001 times, right? And so I'm always comparing me to you. I'm always comparing me to my two brothers, and they're relentless bullies on top of me, right? So there's these feelings of inadequacies, right? But like I said earlier, there's another thing going on in my house. It's called secrets. See, if you live in my house, you live in my neighborhood. You don't talk about what goes on in your house or your neighborhood. That's a snitch. So you push this stuff down. You push this stuff down until you're ready to implode. And I was ready to implode at the age of 13 when I took my first drink in a cemetery with 5 guys. I can remember it like it happened yesterday. It's 54 years ago. And here comes that first bottle called 45 malt liquor. Here comes that second bottle, Mohawk Blackberry Brandy. And I start drinking that day. What I can tell you about my first night drinking is I blacked out. I puked purple for 2 weeks. Took a beating from my mother, and my mother apparently grounded me for life. But the hook was in. I found a magic elixir. It's called alcohol. And it solved all those things. What's that have to do with my character defects? Everything. Everything. Because this is where I started this story. The story I created in my mind. The script that I wrote in my head towards everything. This is where the fear, the insecurity, the resentments, the anger, the rage. I'm fighting on the streets by the time I'm 13, 14, 15 years old. I'm becoming a product of the streets. I'm starting to become a little thief, a little criminal. I'm doing all these things that, my dad and mom never set me down on. This is how you rob a car. This is how you rob a train. It just became a way of life because, like someone else said, I'm a chameleon. I want to be part of rather than separate from. So I start to do things that the older guys are doing in the neighborhood. And what I don't see is I'm starting to build my character defect resume. And I think because I just stopped drinking, all that stuff is going to go away. But it doesn't go away. So here I am. I'm sitting with this guy, Bill Grace, again, year 5, and he's really painting me into the corner. And what he painted me into the corner was these 2 things. Jimmy, here's your choices. Door number 1, keep doing what you're doing and expect not to drink. Good luck. Or accept the unknown, spiritual help, and be willing to step into the mystery called spirituality. Man, what an order. I can't go through with it. Because I want a blueprint of what's this going to look like if I trust this power called God. I want a spreadsheet. I want all that stuff. What is my life going to look like if I really trust this power? Because I fix, I control, and I manage everything in my life. To let go and let God, and to match calamity with serenity, how do you do that? Pause when agitated or doubtful, how do you do that? I'm a reactor. Fear makes me react to everything. Anger makes me react to everything. So how am I going to do this? So I sat with this guy and we started to talk about, all these old ideas and all these things that I'm really, I'm driven by. So I was willing to write that inventory. So I sat with this guy, Bill, and I got on my knees and I did that 3rd step prayer. I was impressed that he knew the prayer without reading it out of a book. I've been in 1,000 prayer circles by this point in meetings in my first 5 years. I've held your hands many a places. We said the Lord's Prayer. We said the Serenity Prayer. But this is the first time I got on my knees with another man and held his hands. And I could feel his spirit come into mine. But more importantly, I was impressed that he could read that prayer without reading it out of the book. But when I got off my knees, he said to me, it's time to go in. It's time to go in, uncover, discover, and discard. To get down, as Harold talked about, the common manifestations of living a life on self-will. And I did that inventory. And then I had the greatest day of my life other than my 2 children being born, and that was my original 5th step. And I was in for a long talk. At the end of that talk, I was instructed to do what we do. Take that hour, go home, put the book on a shelf. I didn't do any of that. I went to a place called Liberty State Park in Jersey City. It was a state park they were building on the Hudson River right before, and right before they finished building, there used to be piers that shot out into the water. And I sat down on the end of this pier. And if you know the language on page 75 in the bottom, it talks about taking that hour, reading those first 5 proposals, all the stones properly in pace. So I go out and I sit on this pier. It was a beautiful day. I was given another piece of paper, and I'm going to read this really, really fast because this was part of my homework with this sponsor. It doesn't come out of the big book, but he wanted me to have clarity on why I'm taking this hour as I'm ready to go into like the most important work of my life, step 6 and step 7. So along with the first 5 steps, he said, Jimmy, I just want you to consider these questions. Ask yourself these questions as you sit in this hour. Step 1, do I believe I'm powerless over alcohol and my life's unmanageable? Do I believe I have no power, choice, or control before the first drink in my body or in my mind and after the first drink in my body? Do I believe I cannot manage my own life? Do I believe my mind will take me back to a drink? Do I believe I have a mind that will take me back to which is killing me? Do I believe that my body is quite as abnormal as my mind and my body will experience the phenomena of craving once I start to take a drink? And do I believe I will experience strange mental blank spots without a spiritual experience? Step 2, am I still willing to accept spiritual help? And if not, I will experience the bitter end. Am I still willing to have God restore me to sanity? Do I believe God can and will relieve me of my alcoholism? And am I willing to believe to believe in a power greater than myself? Step 3, am I convinced that my life run on self-will could hardly be a success? And am I willing to quit playing God in all areas of my life? Am I clear that turning my will and my life over to the care of God is none of my business? And step 4, have I been thorough in all areas or tried to sneak through the archway? So I sat with those questions. And then we turned the page onto 76. If I could answer to our satisfaction, we're now at step 6. Not my home group satisfaction, not my sponsor's satisfaction, my satisfaction. Am I clear on where I stand going into that 6th step? Because we turned that page and we looked at nothing but negativity really the whole time. And when I turn that page, this whole process is about trusting God from this point forward. Do I really trust this power? Right? And am I willing to start changing some things in my life? Am I willing to stop doing certain things and start doing other things? Here's my original 5th step. Because I come from a school where, when we listen to 5th steps, I'm writing down your character defects. I'm also writing down your 8-step list for the guy I'm listening to. Right? Because we'll have a conversation if he disagrees with any of this stuff, but the things I hear from you telling me you're reading your inventory, the things that come real clear to me, things that are patterns in our behaviors that we could hear when we're not affected, when we're not attached, when we're just listening to a 5th step along with God from someone else. And so here's my original one. I still got it. I keep everything I ever did. And, there's a lot of good character defects on that. And let me tell you something. A lot of that's still here. A lot of that is still here. My wife's getting a phone call. It must be someone important. So I have this unbelievable 5th step experience. And I asked God to take away the character defects that have been revealed. Right? And I would pray on that. And I would pray on that. And then I got overtime. And then I would pray on that. And then I coach baseball. And then I would once in a while pray on that. And little by little, I fell for the biggest trap we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. I fell prey to comfortability. And overtime was important. Coaching baseball was important. Coaching girls basketball was important. And little by little, I started to drift in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I don't know I'm drifting, right? We're the last one to see that, right? And nothing wrong with all that stuff, overtime and coaching and being part of your kids' lives. But it just started to overtake my primary purpose. I could tell that story. I take my boat out into the ocean, and I can point it east and I can see the most beautiful thing every day of the week is the sunrise. What a beautiful thing to see where we live. But what I don't see is how my boat's drifting from town to town to town. And that's what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. And all of a sudden, all those walls I started to bring down through the process of the inventory and the fifth step and a little bit of 6, all of a sudden those walls start to get rebuilt brick by brick by brick. But I don't think I see it. Well, I know I don't see it. And I'm so delusional because I'll tell you that, well, I got a sponsor, I'm doing service work, I'm going to meetings, and I really believe that. But again, what I don't see is the drift. I wanted God's help, but I wanted it on my terms again. And that's one of the things I don't see sometimes, right? So these work of tearing down these walls, and for the next few years, like I told you, it all came crashing down. So at year 10, I do what most cowards do. This marriage that I walked out on, and I got back with that wife, believe it or not, and had these 2 babies, and had a beautiful home, and had a great job, had a lot of good things around my life, materialistically. And there's an old saying, don't let the life that AA gave you take you away from your AA life. Because at year 10, I started to drift, like I said, and I walked out of my marriage into the arms of a woman who understands in AA. And I blow up my life in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't have enough character defects to tell you about what was going on in my life in that moment. I'm the guy that builds a beautiful spiritual structure for me and my family, and I tear it down with a senseless series of sprees. And you don't need to be drinking to blow your life up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Just sponsor people, you'll find that out. Right? And by the time I'm 13 years sober, I want to drink. I want to drink. Because I'm giving my sponsor 20% of what's going on in my life. I'm lying about everything to everyone, about everything. I'm living that double life that the fifth step talks about. Everything's secretive. All my character defects are they're just humming right off me. And one day I decide, screw it. I'm giving up. I'm going to walk into a bar. I'm going to order a drink. I understand what Dr. Bob says when he says he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, because I didn't want that drink, but man, I needed that drink. And I walk into a bar in New Jersey and I say, bartender, put the drink down. He does. And the devil and the angel pop out, drink it, don't drink it, drink it, don't drink it. And all of a sudden a hand goes around that glass and pulls it back. And when I look at it, and when I look up, the bartender just happened to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. What are you doing? Apparently throwing my life away. And I walked out of there with my tail between my leg, and 2 weeks later I'm in a meeting judging a guy in AA. And that's how I met this sponsor. I love that line, or I love that paragraph that Bill writes in How It Works when he says that some of these we balk. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we cannot. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, our old character defects, our old belief systems, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Why do I struggle in my recovery? Why can't I let go? Why do I hold on to these character defects like I can't get by life without them? Right? Why can't I let go and change? Why can't I just have faith that God could do for me when I can't do that for myself? I got a history of that happening. But why do I keep on falling into that trap? I think it comes down to one word. A word that will kill more alcoholics maybe than a resentment. I don't know. That word is pride. You see, my pride is the essence of my self-centeredness. My pride is the thing that leads to procession of all my character defects. And pride will always step in its rightful place when I'm in spiritual stagnation. And like Mary Beth said, here, God, here's the drink problem. I'm going to handle the rest of my life. And what I don't see is how I'm just self-will run riot again. Jimmy on Jimmy, running the show. So as I went through that work again, this guy who became my sponsor, he took me into a lot of deep work that's not only in the big book, but really starting to peel that onion back. And I started to get deeper into this thing called spirituality, and I started to look at things on a level I never looked at before. How many times do we say to the newcomer, are you willing to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol? And their head's like a bobblehead doll in front of us. Yep. Well, how many times does the book reference, please, we beg of you to set aside your old ideas, your prejudice towards what? Towards God? Yeah, and everything else. 14, 15, 16 times in those early chapters. What are your old ideas? My life should look like this when it comes to relationships. My life should look like this when it comes to work. My life should look like this when it comes to money. My life should look like this when it comes to my family. My life should look like this when it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous. And a minute doesn't look the way I think it should look, that's the conflict in my mind. And that creates the problems, that creates the emotions, that creates the attitudes. And before you know it, I'm the guy in your AA room that you don't want in your AA room because I'm judging the hell out of every one of you. And I'm a character assassinating you in my mind, right? Because I'm trying to fix, control, and manage. But what that third step tells me is I have a role to play. And what that role to play is to be, like Mary Beth shared, I work for God. And what's that job? Help His kids. And like most good fathers, if I help His kids, what most good fathers do for their children? They help their children, right? So here I am, again, at the crossroads, 14, 15 years sober, struggling in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, sitting with this new sponsor, and he was no different from the last sponsor, no different from a lot of the guys I had that sponsored me, right? The path to God is not a straight line. He would say that all the time. The path to God is not a straight line. Me and my buddy Tommy over here, we did a retreat in Malibu a couple months ago, a beautiful retreat house in Malibu, California. And at the top of that mountain, and I know some people have been in this room have been there, but there's a beautiful cross, and at the base of the cross is a statue of St. Francis. And at night they light it up. It looks gorgeous, right? And if you went down to the Pacific Coast Highway and looked up and saw that cross, you would say, there's God. But in order to get to that cross, it's a series of trails, it's a series of roads, potholes, landmines, a lot of things in the way, right? So this thing that we follow called spirituality isn't a straight line. My sponsor likes to say it all the time. We're all human beings on a spiritual walk. Sometimes we lose focus of the walk. And our humanness gets the best of us. So going into 6 again, going into 7 again, looking at these 7 deadly sins of pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, sloth, This is where Sandy Beach would always say, this is where we dial on how much happiness we really want. This is why it says we separate the men from the boys. So back to the consideration. Do I look at the people in my life? My parents, my friends, my family, my ex-wife, people I work with, my neighbors, people in traffic, people in the grocery store, you name it, people. Do I look at these people through the lens of a character defect? Do I look at you with contempt? Do I look at you with anger? Do I look at you with envy or jealousy, whatever the character defect is? Do I look at the situations in my life? We're all going to have adversity in our life. We're all going to have our turn in a barrel when it comes to hard things. December 6, 1999, I'm working on the highway authority. I come off and I got in a horrific accident on that day. I've been retired since that day, 41 years old. I've had 41 surgeries in the last 20 years. I'm really 5'8", but with all the metal in me, I'm 6'4". It's a miracle how that happens. But those kind of situations, financial situations, health situations. I found my father dead at 18 months sober. Found my mother, took care of my mother in her last days. I mean, the adversities of life. Do I look at those situations through the lens of a character defect? The circumstances of my life, all the things that have happened to me. Well, has the change occurred? Has the transformation occurred? Where now I can start to look at things with forgiveness. Love and tolerance. If love and tolerance is our code, I got to ask you, is it? What's it look like after the home group on a Friday night? Do we just go to a diner and just assassinate the speaker? I mean, we do things like that. Well, I do things like that. Only when Don speaks, don't worry. So I needed to create these guiding principles. And when I went into this, I was reading the book, Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers at that time. I remember this. because I was reading a lot about the Oxford Group at the time. And the Oxford Group had the 4 absolutes. It's not part of Alcoholics Anonymous. Absolute honesty, unselfishness, purity, and love, right? And so I said to myself, this is what I'm going to start my day with. This is what I'm going to call my guiding principles for life right now. I'm asking God to help me with this stuff, and hopefully that stuff goes out into all my other character defects, right? This is the belief system I walked around with. So every day I would pray for those 4 absolutes in my life. And then I would do what we all need to do. I would walk out that front door and I get on this thing called the bike of life, right? The bike of life. And every day, all of us in this room get on our bike of life. And some days, some of us fall off the bike immediately. Some days, some of us fall off the bike 2 times. Some of us fall off the bike 10 times. And if it's a real bad day, sometimes it just feels like we're falling off the bike 100 times, right? But see, what I think step 6 is really about, it's about getting back on the bike. See, if my little kids or when my kids were learning how to ride a bike and they fell off the bike, I didn't pick up the bike and throw it in a dumpster and say, this doesn't work. This deal works just fine. This whole thing right here is about the willingness to get back on the bike. And whatever your guiding principles are, whatever prayer life you have, whatever meditation life you have, or whatever inventory of life you have, I think it's about getting back to those things, back to the basics of what this is all about. It's turning to God, right? That visualization that guy Bill Grace gave me a long time ago, this idea of, we have to walk out into the sunlight of the Spirit. Well, I could tell everyone in the room, if I said to you, okay, close all those doors and put every chair against those doors, all we need to do is get free, is to go out those doors. What would we all have to do? Constructive action, harmonious action, to move the chairs, to get out there. It's no different in our recoveries. Right? It takes work. It takes effort. It takes a willingness to look at the causes and conditions of the things that continue to block me from God and block me from you. It never ends. And again, sometimes they get minimized, but sometimes, I don't even see it, and I fly right through that stop sign. And before you know it, boom, I'm yelling at someone. So to be entirely ready, as the 6th step would say. How many of us are entirely ready to have a different way of life? Not many of us, Bill says. And why aren't we entirely ready to have these things removed away? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. And one of the reasons I know for me is I make a conscious decision that I'm never going to give it up. I think my character defects have value sometimes. That might sound absurd. I think anger works for a guy like me. Now that sounds even crazier. But I know if I'm angry enough, I could push my wife away where she will not bother me. But you see, I'm very manipulative too. And I know if I could push her away, I could also reel her in with my anger, and I can get whatever I want. It's almost like an art. But we all have that inside of us. So sometimes I think my character defects just have value, right? I'm not willing to let go of that stuff. Another reason why is I blame my character defects. It's your fault. If you had my dad, you'd be angry too. If you had this, you'd be like that too. I'm always pointing the finger. I can't take stock honestly. It's always someone's fault for what I do, right? So I blame a lot of that stuff. Rationalize. Because of the walls, I can't even see, what my character defects are doing to you. So I rationalize. I'm not that bad. I'm not as bad as Tommy. I'm not as bad as Harold or any of these guys. Right? And then sometimes I'm in just complete denial that I even have character defects. So how do I become entirely ready? Get on the bike. Get on the bike. It's that simple. A plan of action. What am I willing to stop doing today, and what am I willing to start doing today? The old Joel and Charlie thing used to say, okay, Jimmy's will is this, character defects. God's will is this, the complete opposite. And that sounds like a very simple formula to go from there to there. But I think we need a little bit more of that. I think we need a plan of action when it comes to that. So I do an exercise with the guys I sponsor, like, what are you willing to do? What are you willing to stop doing to change your behavior? Because that's all behavior is. It's learned behavior. None of us are our behavior. It's just who we become. Behavior can be changed. It's about how willing am I to change that behavior. So what am I willing to do? And that just leads me into step 7. The prayer doesn't say, I want to be happy, I want to be rich. It's about being useful. And I can't be useful and self-loathing at the same time. So what am I willing to do to carry this message out or to be of service to others? Harold says this all the time. We got 3 purposes in AA. Primary purpose, singleness purpose, and real purpose. My real purpose is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God. What does that look like? Right? And I can't be of service to you when I have a motive. I can't be service to you when I'm trying to get my way. I can't be of service to you when I'm trying to run through your life. So what am I willing to let go of? Right? And when I start to do this stuff, I start to experience something. And I didn't know this was going to be the byproduct of all this stuff. I've been living my life like it's a pendulum. Anyone else like that? One day I love her, the next day I hate her. One day I love my job, the next day I hate my job. And what I've learned through this process over a long period of time is that pendulum starts to stop swinging so broadly. And it gets to a place where Bill would call being right size. And it's in that right sizeness that I start to experience something I've never experienced in my life. And that's called emotional sobriety, emotional maturity. I start to see this thing in a different light. I start to put on a new pair of glasses. I start to see what's really important in my life through 6 and 7. That I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good grandfather. I want to be a good friend. I want to be a good sponsor. Right? So every day is a day when I need to go into prayer and meditation to ask God to help me with this kind of stuff. Bill writes that great article in the Grapevine years ago about, emotional sobriety. And he talked about in that thing that he had it all backwards. He thought that, circumstances and people would make him happy. Man, I've lived my whole life with the idea of cash and prizes. The material world's going to solve my problem. Right? But this thing that we're talking about this weekend, it's about going from that place of being potted in a sick pot of spiritual soil in the materialistic world where we all live by the rules of the material world, and we get ripped out and we get planted and our roots start to grasp the new soil. And what that new soil is, living with the principles of the spiritual world. There's a big difference in those two things. And so what these 2 steps really start to give me is something that I didn't even know what it meant, was some kind of a little bit of a humility. That's a big word for a guy like me. I didn't even know what humility meant. I remember passing a literature table at a meeting one day, and they had a lot of grapevines out there. And one of the old grapevines, they had on the headliner said humility, and I remember reading that and opening it up. It had that definition that Bill used, at all times, in all places, to seek and do the will of God. How you doing with that, Jimmy? Am I really bringing that into my life on a daily basis? And then we get that acid test, and the acid test is, something that I'm sure, I forgot who's doing 10 and 11. Mari, I'm sorry. But I love that line in the 10 and 11 when it talks about, when the real adversities, when the real troubles hit our life, can we stay sober? Can we live to emotional balance? And can we live to good purpose? I think of a gymnast all the time when I read that. You know how those gymnasts, those little girls, they get on that balance beam. It's a 20-foot piece of wood with about 4 inches wide. They could do flips and everything else, cartwheels on that stuff. Well, that's our lives in here. That's our lives in here. When the hard stuff comes, can I stay balanced on that beam? Can I stay sober when the hard times come? Can I live to emotional balance? Can I, be of good purpose to other people when the hard times come? And what I found that 6 and 7 really starts that process. And the real power of change will be when I start knocking on doors with that list that my sponsor gave me, when I'm going to go make amends to you for my behavior. And whether that's emotional harms, physical harms, sexual harms, financial harms, that's where I'm really going to see the power of step 6 and 7. When I come face to face with you, and I'm willing to change this behavior, willing to talk to you about what I've caused in your life, and to get the response from you. So, we had that serenity prayer, and, the serenity prayer, acceptance and courage, acceptance and courage, acceptance and courage. And then when I could accept and I could practice courage in my life, and when I could ask God to take away these character defects and to stop doing the things that I found are objectionable, it just seems like my life gets a lot easier and a lot smoother. So that's all I have. Thank you.